It's Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. Hello, and welcome to Monster Mondays. I am Jeff Arbuckle, co-host of the podcast Film Seizure, that you can catch each Wednesday at filmseizure.com or at a number of podcast providers online. This week marks the 350th episode of Monster Mondays, and why not celebrate this momentous occasion by looking at a movie that is immensely celebrated by underground cult movie fans the world over. That's right. Celebrating its 50th anniversary, let's do the time warp again and discuss the sci-fi horror comedy musical smash hit, The Rocky Horror Picture Show. The roots of this 1975 film begin with London unemployed actor Richard O'Brien. Feeling kind of bored one winter in the early 70s, O'Brien wrote the majority of the script for the Rocky Horror Show. Now, O'Brien took a lot of inspiration from his favorite things since childhood. He was a fan of the 50s sci-fi and B-horror movies. He also wanted to mix the humor found within the monster movies of the era, along with the kind of silly dialogue that almost seemed to keep warning and preaching to people to watch the skies, or don't use nuclear weapons, or watch out for commies, etc. But he also wanted to use the muscle flick starring the likes of Steve Reeves. Then, as the cherry on top of all of this, he wanted to score this film with a kind of 50s rock and roll aesthetic, along with the 70s glam rock. He also wanted to inject a little bit of that feel into it too. Now, O'Brien often said that glam rock allowed him to be himself even more. And I think a lot of this also played into O'Brien's own fluid realization of his gender, even if he didn't necessarily understand that concept dating all the way back to the 70s. I mean, it was still there within him. And after an appearance in Jesus Christ Superstar on stage, O'Brien became friends with that play's director, Jim Sharman. Now, Sharman is an Australian, and he worked with O'Brien a few more times. But the key thing was that O'Brien showed Sharman what he had written for this experimental musical that he was occupying himself with writing that winter while unemployed. Sharman had a small theater of his own in Chelsea and felt that this could be a good place to give this show a little bit of a workout. And while it was in rehearsals, the name of the play was actually They Came from Denton High, before Sharman suggested the Rocky Horror Show just before previews started. Now, the show was popular right from the start. Throughout 1973, the show kept getting moved to larger and larger venues. In 1974, the show was brought to Los Angeles before moving to New York and beyond. In 1975, the Rocky Horror Show came to Broadway, and while a popular stage show for sure, it's nothing compared to the film's success. Somewhere, every weekend, to this day, usually playing at midnight and usually loaded with die-hard fans who have seen the movie hundreds of times, or at least as many times it would take to know all the lines, affectations, and lyrics to the music as it would take. And to be honest with you, there are so many like little in-jokes and things that you're supposed to do at certain points in the movie. I don't really even know all of those. But droves of people, particularly younger people who were open to or friendly with alternative lifestyles, cultures, or sexualities, would line up in costume waiting to see the movie and perform with everyone else in the theater. And I remember when theaters used to play this at midnight on a Saturday night, I think every month. But I actually never attended a screening. That's why I don't know what all the rules are or all the different things you're supposed to say. I know there's certain things specifically pointed at Brad and Janet and so on. But that actually doesn't mean that I don't understand the love for this movie. And I'll have a lot more to say about that later. Now, I'm going to get into the movie here, but I think it's a good idea for people to actually watch the movie, because it's a difficult movie to really explain all the ins and outs and all of the little things that people love about how this movie is made, how this movie is performed. But I can at least tell you what the general gist is and the beat by beat stuff. So the movie begins with a good old fashioned white wedding at a white church full of a lot of white people. Good old heteronormative marriage. And after the wedding, we meet Brad Majors and Janet Weiss, played by Barry Bostwick and Susan Sarandon. After all the excitement of Ralph and Betty Hapschatt's marriage, and Janet catching the bouquet, Brad breaks out into song to propose to her, and after their musical engagement, Brad and Janet want to visit the man whose class they met in, Dr. Scott. And we get some additional exposition from Charles Gray, who's playing a character simply known as the criminologist. He explains that Brad and Janet are on their way to visit Dr. Scott in a pretty bad rainstorm with a pretty worn out tire and no spare tire. And after reaching an unexpected dead end in the road, Brad's tire indeed blows out, forcing them to seek help at the spooky castle in the middle of nowhere. And upon arriving, they find a curious party happening. The door is answered by the hunchback handyman named Riff Raff, and he allows them in and tells them how they arrived at one of the master's affairs. He and his sister, the maid Magenta, lead the partygoers in a rendition of probably the most popular song from the movie, The Time Warp. And after the song concludes, Janet really wants to leave, but Brad thinks it'd be kind of rude to do this. And Brad holds them up long enough for them to be introduced to the sweet transvestite from transsexual Transylvania, Frankenfurter. Frank invites the couple to stay to get a peek into what he's doing in his lab upstairs. Frank is building a blonde-haired, blue-eyed, perfect man. And in a tank of rainbow-colored liquid, Frank's man, Rocky, comes to life for all the partygoers. It's love, or at least lust, at first sight as Frank chases a confused Rocky around the lab like it's a Looney Tunes cartoon. And after Frank tells Rocky he can make him into a man in 7 days, all of a sudden Meatloaf, playing a character named Eddie and sporting a fresh head wound, busts out of a deep freeze chamber. His biker/rockabilly song about loving rock and roll gets Frank and everyone else to dance along. And, Frank basically kills Eddie by axing the crap out of him. And Frank actually has to tell Rocky, it was for his own good. And Frank takes Rocky to the honeymoon suite to get work on that, making the newborn into a man. Now, the criminologist tells us that Brad and Janet's concerns started to grow as the party began to let out, and they were shown to completely separate rooms. In hopes to awaken certain fantasies and desires, Frank goes around the castle having some fun. Janet decides to give in to Frank's advances, while Riff Raff and Magenta torture Rocky, making him run away. And unaware of his servant's mistreatment of his new playmate, Frank visits Brad and begins to seduce him as well. Distraught over her and Brad's infidelity, Janet finds Rocky hiding in his tank, and while Magenta and a groupie that hangs out at the castle named Columbia watch along on a little closed-circuit TV, Janet seduces Rocky. Seemingly looking for Brad and Janet, Dr. Scott arrives at the castle. Frank knows this Dr. Scott. He knows that Scott works for the FBI, basically researching UFOs, which is a little bit of a concern for Frankenfurter, Riff Raff, and Magenta, seeing how they're aliens. But Dr. Scott is not actually aware that Brad and Janet were there when he arrived. He was actually looking for Eddie, his nephew. Eddie tried to get a note to Dr. Scott to say that Frank is up to no good. And Dr. Scott even knows Frank, Riff Raff, and Magenta are indeed from another planet. Using another one of his diabolical inventions, Frank turns Janet, Brad, and Dr. Scott into statues. And after being told off by Columbia for spurning her attentions and killing Eddie, a guy that she kind of liked, Frank turns her and Rocky into statues too. Now, Frank has the statue's taken to a theater inside his castle for a floor show. And the floor show is essentially an elaborate cabaret where there are steps and, everybody has a part to play. There's like a pool in there. There's also a model of a radio tower built after the RKO logo. But so each of these characters are dressed in corsets, fishnets, and heels. And as each character sings about their minds and libidos being expanded by Frank. But this goes on for a little bit until Riff Raff and Magenta break up the show. And Riff Raff tells Frank that his mission on Earth has been a failure. Riff Raff is now in command and Frank is to be his prisoner for a lifestyle too extreme. And after one more song saying he's ready to go home now to an imaginary, adoring audience, Magenta is unimpressed. Riff Raff says that when he mentioned that they were to return to Transylvania, he meant that it was just he and Magenta. Frankenfurter is to be executed. And Riff Raff first shoots Columbia with his laser when she screamed in horror, but then he turns to shoot Frank. And when Rocky tries to escape up that model of the RKO radio tower with Frank's body, Riff Raff shoots the model down. The siblings then tell Dr. Scott, Brad, and Janet that they need to vamoose before they transport the entire castle back to their home planet, transsexual in the galaxy, Transylvania. And the criminologist leaves us with a thought. Perhaps we're all just insects crawling across the planet's surface, lost in space and in meaning as well. So let's talk about the three things I like about this movie. First, I kind of think of this as the cultural height of the 70s in terms of just letting it all hang out, so to speak. The late 60s gave birth to a lot of things. Culturally, there was the sexual revolution, the hippies, feminism, bra burnings, mind expansion through drug use, more experimental music hitting the popular airwaves and then the mainstream. To tie that into other areas in entertainment, the new Hollywood was in full swing by 1975, but that also was born in the late 60s after films like The Graduate, Bonnie and Clyde, Easy Rider, and so much more. The counterculture movement was now fully kind of the culture of the country. Many more people were experiencing different types of people, wanting to see new stories being told and so forth. And the Rocky Horror Picture Show, I feel, is kind of a wonderful blend of all of those things. You have 70s glam rock music. You have an expansion of sexual themes playing with pansexuality, cross-dressing, transgender concepts, and much, much more. And you have a movie that is not playing by the rules on a technical level as well. In some ways, this movie is playing out like a stage show. In others, you have a lot of quick editing and fourth wall breaking. The movie is played extremely straight, no pun intended, but also doesn't take itself seriously at all. It has a foot firmly in the past for, like all that inspiration of the 50s B movies and the sci-fi movies of that era, but also firmly in the present with all of these new concepts of, looking at sexuality in different ways and looking at, just how a story can be told at a time in which stories were getting told in very different ways than they used to. And those fourth wall breaks are the movie kind of sharing the joke with you as well. It's really kind of a stunning achievement to make this movie work in a way that feels fresh, even if you've seen it 50 times. It's a very fun movie, but for as good as Susan Sarandon is at playing the G. Willikers bumpkin, or Brad is at playing the kind of classic 50s nerdy hero of sorts, or Little Nell O'Brien and Patricia Quinn are as Columbia, Riff Raff, and Magenta, second, this is an amazing performance by Tim Curry. Tim Curry is never one to fail any audience. Even in craptacular films like 1995's Congo, Curry always stands out. But among all his roles he's ever played, good God, is he transformative as Frankenfurter in this. I mean, you know it's Curry, but it's so hard to see the guy who would just 10 years later play a version of the devil himself in Legend, or the funny butler guy in Clue, for example. But he embodies Frankenfurter to the point that I can't imagine anyone else being satisfactory in the role in later performances of the stage show, or if they, God forbid, remake the movie. You are locked in whenever he's on screen, which is, after about 20 minutes, the entire rest of the movie. Curry flirts with the camera, and by extension, the audience, when he breaks the fourth wall. He's winking. He's making little facial gestures. It feels so natural, too. Like, you're not really seeing a performance. You're seeing Frankenfurter as if that's a real person. But all of that goes beyond fun and engaging. The performance is so good, you almost become obsessed with it. You can't take your eyes off of Frankenfurter and off of Curry's affectations, the way he speaks, the way he kind of embodies this, just this phenomenally built character. And if I were to rank some of the all-time very best performances in film history, Curry's Frankenfurter deserves a spot in the top 10, if not top 5. Third, Richard O'Brien's music is fantastic. And while the campier songs like Damn It, Janet, The Time Warp, Sweet Transvestite, and so on often get maybe the most attention, there are 3 softer, I would almost say emotional songs that always get to me. And the top of that list is Science Fiction Double Feature. That's a hell of a theme song for this movie. I can't tell you how many of the references made in that theme song for this movie has been covered on Monster Mondays, or at least has, or maybe possibly will be covered on Monster Mondays. Maybe. But it's a song all about the love of B movies, of monsters, and the thrills and chills of movies when you're younger and coming of age. Particularly the sci-fi and horror element, those fantastical movies, those really latch on the kids, especially in that era. I can imagine what it would have been like for people growing up during the 50s, kind of being attached to some of those old late night movies that would ultimately later, when you're an adult, play again on TV. But it's Richard O'Brien telling you how he got here to this show and this movie. While there is an orchestral element to that song, the electric bass undertone that can be heard throughout the song, but especially the little step downs before and after each verse, bridging the verses from one to the next, is just excellent and brings us back to the present day of the 70s with its more pop glam rock sensibilities. Later in the film, when things are coming to a head, there are 2 songs by Frankenfurter that are excellent punctuation points. Don't Dream It, Be It goes one step further from Science Fiction Double Feature by expressing the yearning of seeing oneself not as the monster or the masculine hero of the movie, but in this case, Fay Wray of King Kong, seeing how she looked, having all those kind of queer and potentially trans people in the audience wanting to become her instead. It goes beyond the dress and her looks, but how she clings to Kong and knowing that he's doomed. It's, if you were growing up kind of transfixed by those earlier, or by those movies of the 50s that you were watching as a kid, this was now you kind of understanding some more things about yourself and what you relate to. It's a power within the scene that is resonating just as much as her dress. In this case, you kind of want to, or in this case, an audience member may want to become Fay Wray as opposed to the man of the story or the monster of the story. Now, of course, there's the show ending I'm Going Home when Frank is giving his final soliloquy in song form. He talks about how he suffered pain and loss, but through it all, he's also seen blue skies. And he thinks he's getting to go home with Riff Raff and Magenta, only to discover that they're here to stop him from existing. I mean, it's a sad song and allows Tim Curry to really take a bite out of the show floor scene that ends the film. Well, as if he doesn't take enough bites out of every time the camera is on him. But yeah, so why is this movie so popular? I mean, there could be a million reasons why, and while there, I'm sure, many movies that, you know, have a cult following just as strong as this one, even some mainstream movies that were even popular during their times, can have cult followings decades later, but nothing has ever been like the Rocky Horror Picture Show when it comes to its fandom. And I know that there are probably scientific and firsthand accounts of why this is such a big deal. And I am not 100% the best person to try to contextualize this movie's popularity. But if you allow me to kind of ramble for a bit, I can at least tell you what I think I find the attractiveness and power of this movie being. By 1975, like I mentioned, the counterculture of the 60s had evolved to the point that people got the gist of the importance of the rebellious movies like Easy Rider or some of the other biker flicks of the late 60s and early 70s. So they knew that they needed to push back against the mainstream. And as a group, these people knew that they had to show they wouldn't necessarily roll over to be dominated by the old stuffy ideas of previous generations. But between that desire to kind of stand for their own truths and the harder, grittier, or more thought-provoking rock and roll and experimenting with sex, drugs, and so forth, people were no longer really necessarily fighting against the man in the same ways, but wanted to understand themselves and express their true natures and use that as their weapon against normality. Whether that was to simply be a weirdo or revel in sexual escapades or be a crossdresser, trans person, or be gay or whatever the case is, people wanted to be themselves. And maybe they didn't always feel comfortable in expressing that at work or in the daylight, but for a couple of hours in a darkened theater with 100 others who love the same thing you do and want to express themselves as well, not only can you be who you truly are, but you can find almost a familial group of people, somebody that you would start to see every month or every other weekend or however often Rocky Horror would play. And they became a safe zone for you. And I think that alone makes this movie a beloved classic. Forget about cult classic. It's now transcended that to become a true classic. It is now a movie that film lovers share almost as a rite of passage of sorts, as they make the recommendation to others to watch it as, you know, another box to check on a list of all the great and beloved movies. Most of the people who go to the theater to experience the Rocky Horror Picture Show do it because they need a place to feel like themselves, to feel normal. And no one in the theater is going to berate you if you are a guy wearing lipstick and fishnets like Frankenfurter for, you know, being queer or an F slur or whatever. No one is going to call you a whore if you're a girl scantily clad in a slip and garters like we see Janet dressed in for a bit of this movie. You're not going to be body shamed. It becomes a place that people feel connected. They share this movie with everyone else in that theater at the same time. The real world is in that theater for that 2 hours. And when it's over, they may have to go back to their conservative Christian home and pretend to be someone else until the next showing where they can be themselves again. You know, we do live in a world where people are becoming more openly proud to be themselves, but for 30, 40 years to feel proud to be who and what you are, you may have needed a Rocky Horror experience. You may be needed to be with that group of people. But it's a beautiful thing because people could forget about the things that they could not escape in the quote unquote real world. You know, they could do things they would otherwise might be scared to do or feel or be scared to feel outside that theater. That sense of community over this movie didn't have to be understood by anyone else. And that's how you get this ardent group of fans. That fandom is kind of welcoming, and you can feel that fandom hovering around this movie as it plays on your TV, almost like a specter. And honestly, while not my favorite movie, but one I very much like nonetheless, it's a movie that almost dares you to not be a big fan of it because you can feel that heat from the fandom pulsating off of it as you watch it. But that wraps up this week's Monster Mondays for the 350th time, if you can believe it. But you can catch new episodes of Monster Mondays each Monday afternoon at filmseizure.com. And don't forget to follow Film Seizure at Facebook, Threads, Instagram, and Blue Sky. You can also subscribe to Film Seizure to get both the Film Seizure podcast and Monster Mondays at your favorite podcast providers, as well as YouTube. You can also check out my website, bmovieanima.com, to read new reviews every Friday morning. Next time, we return to Japan, but for something a little different. Let's visit the macabre imagination of Junji Ito and his animated miniseries Uzumaki. And until next week, stay spooky.